Good afternoon, good morning, I think good evening, and good afternoon to everybody that's joined us today. Thank you first of all for all joining. I can see we've got a good turnout so far, and I think a few more people joining us. Now, looking as well from the audience, we've got a very good mix as well of companies, backgrounds and disciplines within those. So yeah, good to see the variance on the call. Now, first of all, just before we go into too much detail, I'll give you a brief overview to the two companies. I know they'll be new to some of you. We've got BCD on the call. BCD is one of the leading travel management companies globally, with around about 15,000 staff, and I think it's 25.5 billion in revenue, operating across 109 different countries. And some of their founding, beliefs are really giving travelers the right information and tools to be happy and make informed and safe decisions whilst on the road. And Safeture is the leading global employee safety, risk and crisis management platform. Now, it's built up of three core pillars, and that's information, so a global view of risk and crisis information. This could be anything from terrorist attacks, it could be the COVID information, or if you're going into countries, relevant LGBTQ plus ship with BCD. We see from our side at Safeture, it's a very good choice in our existing client collaborations that we have, our shared value and our shared vision in supporting travelers in their view. So for further information on this, please do feel free to contact either myself or your BCD contact after today. So crisis and travel risk management, it's been a topic for many years, and it's very recently come into the light for everyone here, I think, on today's call. And so today I would like to take a deeper dive into the wider world of crisis risk and travel management, and hopefully avoiding too much chat on this current SARS pandemic, taking with our new 2020 vision and foresight that we've all developed. So I'm delighted to invite today, or to have joined by our two guests here, Lise, Levesque.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Now, just before we go into the conversation, really keen just to kind of keep it as informal and as open a conversation as possible. So everybody that's watching as well, please do jump in with your questions, and we can hopefully make it as informative as possible. So I'm going to get the ball rolling, and I think Jorge, to put the first question to yourself. I mean, what first got you into the industry of travel risk and crisis management?
This is a good way to start, yes. 9 years ago, BCD decided that it was necessary to have a fully dedicated team and in a global level dedicated to crisis management. Because this was after the ash cloud crisis and so on. We have many regional teams, people with dual roles, wearing two hats during crisis and so on. And the company at that time decided that it was necessary to have a fully dedicated team. They invested on that. So I've been all my life in business travel, and I was already working for BCD Travel for many years at that time. In operations, basically managing operations, and I was really somehow tempted by this project to start new department, to start a new area, something that at that time for risk management it was not too much on the table like these days. Luckily, that now is more present than before, and we built process around the crisis action plans that we need to do. Everything in order to support our clients during any crisis that might happen. We built this team from nothing, and after almost it's going to be 10 years next year that we will be having this, and our mission is to help companies to keep their travelers safe. And it's been such a ride, but it's very, very something that I'm very proud that BCD invested at a time on having a dedicated full team. And then along the way, we met Lise. Lise, I will let you explain how you joined the team.
Absolutely. So I joined the Global Crisis Management team back in 2013. So prior to that, I was with BCD, but I was in account management, and I really wanted to bring travel risk management awareness to our clients. But that was, like you mentioned, it wasn't something really a priority for them at the time, right? They were really more focused on cost-saving measures and other program enhancements. So there was this exciting team supporting all our global clients, and it was really new to me in a TMC environment, having a 24/7 dedicated team to watch for our clients and traveler safety. So Jorge was in our Montreal office on a brutally cold January day, and I was really captivated by what this small team was doing, and the passion to bring awareness, helping our clients towards their duty of care responsibilities. And 7 years in, I'm still more excited about it as the years have evolved.
Right. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for going into that. And I think as well, sort of fascinating start to that topic, but we've got a very broad spectrum of people on here today. And so I don't think, some people may not even have much of awareness. What is, if you could provide a brief overview to what is travel risk and crisis management from your position?
Sure. Well, first of all, our team, what it does is we monitor 24/7 for any event that might affect business travelers. From these natural disasters, terrorist attacks, like the one that we have today in Nice, plane crashes, things like that. So any civil unrest, anything that might affect business travelers, our team is monitoring 24/7. And if we identify something that might affect business travelers, we activate certain action plans. We have different levels and so on. So that's what we provide, and that's something that we act as central coordinators in the company. So if we need to pull teams in certain moments to bring more people on, that we will be the ones activating that. That's the crisis management team in BCD. Once we provide that to the clients, it's up to the clients to follow their process and their procedures and whatever they have planned for each case. In addition to that, let me explain as well what the definition that we see about duty of care and travel risk management, because very often they are very constantly used in the people exchange these terms very, very often. Duty of care is the legal obligation that an organization has to do all reasonable efforts. And remember, all reasonable efforts, because there's something that cannot go beyond reasonable, to keep their employees safe. That's a legal obligation. Travel risk management, it's a term that reflects all the policies, process, controls that an organization will put together in order to fulfill that legal obligation. So duty of care, crisis management, duty of care. So basically that's, it's to be ready for when the crisis hits. So hopefully if people is ready, if companies are ready, when a crisis happens, they will be able to sort it without too much problem. So that's what we do. I don't know, Lise, if you want to add something here.
Well, yeah, I can expand it a little bit more, I think, because we're thinking travel risk management, we're thinking duty of care, and crisis management. But I think it's really important that it goes a lot further than just crisis management, right? So companies really need to have processes in place to support their travelers. So this, of course, ties in with their duty of care, which is not a transferable responsibility, and ensuring that their traveler safety. So they have to have an established process 24/7 that supports them. So, beyond crisis response and policies, it's important with other elements like those involved in the program and prevention measures, So this should not necessarily be limited to one person, but there's really several people that need to be involved, and given the type of incident, understanding their roles at any given time. Even those that might need to be on a per need basis, or such as legal or finance, that are not necessarily primary in the program. So we're seeing more companies with many questions and really wanting to have the best in class program, so identifying gaps so they can be ready for what's ahead. And that, of course, is planning before the crisis hits. So, several years back, we developed our services with a thorough assessment to help clients in various aspects, looking at their travel risk management program in various items, how they can engage their travelers, considerations with ongoing audits, even having effective communication strategies as well. So that kind of falls into the bucket.
And from the work you do, I mean, it must be pretty full on, but what would you say as well, your highlights? What would you enjoy most about the work that you do?
The highlights? Okay, well, Although I love being up to date on news and events around the world, I also think sometimes that monitoring it is not the most uplifting with the news and the sad and tragic events that we see every day. But what I do love is really the most is engaging with our clients and how they can make a difference in their program for their company and even their traveling employees. So I remember the first time I was walking in and taking part in a review of a client's program. And I was really fascinated in the discussions in the room with various members in their company from HR, security, IT and travel, along with the C-level engagement, and seeing the outcome achieved with bringing these people together and really being able to share my knowledge and expertise with them as well. I think that the excitement continues every time we meet with those clients in developing their program. So it can sometimes just be, small little steps that they're taking to long-term solutions, but really seeing organizations making this a priority, even if it is a small steps, really demonstrates that it's important to them and that they're overlooking their company and their traveler safety.
All right.
And then it's helping people to go back home safely. So very often when we are seeing so many bad news and disasters and things happening, we try to look at the positive, that we are helping those travelers to go back home safely. So that's what we enjoy as well somehow.
And I can imagine there must be a few frustrations with that as well. I don't know what your biggest frustrations would be within in your day-to-day work.
Well, I would put that there is two ways of two types of frustration. Sometimes it's with the companies because they are reactive instead of proactive. So very often we see an increase of questions around travel risk management after an incident happens. So they are not really preparing for what something happens. That's sometimes frustrating. We have a 24/7 team. We provide information to our clients. We activate action plans. We send information about travelers that might be affected by an incident. And then on the other side, there's companies that they don't have that 24/7 set up or plan to act on those things. That is frustrating because you know that they are missing things, right? Hopefully we see that less and less, and that's something that is changed, and that's our mission here. And in the other side, from the traveler side as well, there is companies that they're investing, they are doing all the best they can to keep those travelers safe, to inform and so on. But if the traveler is not playing their role, if they are not engaged, then it could be also frustrating. So I think it comes two sides, and both sides, they need to do their part. So that's where I really get frustrated when I don't see those things happening. So yeah, that's my take. I don't know if Lise has any frustrations there.
Similar, and I can probably summarize that with a quote that I quite like, which is security is always seen as too much until the day it's not enough. Right. Yeah. So that kind of goes back to what Jorge was saying with the reactive program. So, we also see some clients saying, well, it hasn't happened to us, or it won't happen to us, but it just takes one incident, right, for that to quickly change.
Right. And do you have actually a really curious sort of any anecdotes? You must have sort of scary moments, memorable moments over your sort of time within the industry.
There's been plenty. I think one that comes to mind for me, really looking over the years, is were the attacks in Brussels back in 2016. So that was just not one incident, but there was escalating incidents. So starting with the business day, there was an explosion at the airport. And we knew we had to act and quickly communicate and report for those coming in and out of the airport that day. On the moment, whether it was a terrorist attack or an explosion, regardless, that information needed to be out due to the impact. And of course, that situation then evolved even with more explosions, in the metro system. So it was really progressive. That was 1 hour later. And I think sometimes while we think we're the delivery of tragic news, that one, especially the response and thanks we receive, helping our clients identify that they may have potentially impacted travelers or not, giving them the all clear, and so quickly by helping them with their next steps in their crisis response action. So we also had many BCD colleagues there as well, living in the city, and receiving their response of safety and thanks is, actually that there can be good coming out of these difficult and tragic times.
Imagine. And Jorge, I don't know. Yeah.
For me, the most difficult incidents normally are the plane crashes, because that's something that you can, perfectly that on that list, that list of travelers, there is very little hope. And I remember the first time that we have that situation with the MH370, the Malaysian Airlines plane that it was lost, it was missing. It was a Friday night, and I received a call of the person who was on call at that moment, asking me, "Hey, it's missing. We know we have travelers, but it's unclear. It's going to appear in some moment. What we should be doing, right?" So we end up activating an action plan in order to notify the client and so on, and that's something that always kind of like hits you in a sense that. It's a client that you have there, right, on that plane. And also another one, it was Germanwings, with all the stress of that incident, because I'm based in Barcelona, and that flight, it was departing from Barcelona. Initial reports were saying that it was the Düsseldorf-Barcelona flight, later the Barcelona-Düsseldorf. So that contradictory information in those minutes that you need to really verify the information before you report on something wrongly, those are very, very, very extenuating moments. So there, and because if you are close to the case, like in this case, there was a plane leaving Barcelona, that's something that hits. But at the same time, there is also moments like Lise was saying about Brussels, about good moments that you feel proud somehow about the work that you're doing. One of the things that we established during these years is we have even a process, a duty of care process for our own travelers, for our own BCD employees, and also for the BCD employees worldwide. No matter where you are, BCD has a setup that will reach out to the employees if something happens. And during the Barcelona terrorist attack in La Ramblas, that day I was off, and I was surprised to receive a text from my company asking if I was okay. And at that moment, I really did, this is the process we set up. And at that moment, you feel critical events and so on. We even have a process as well to support travel agents that might be in touch with any bookings that have been affected, program managers, and so on. So yeah, those are things that hit you somehow. However, I want to keep on the positive. Also, you have many no bookings identified during an incident. That is also something that you kind of like gives you a relief to know that, okay, we are on the clear on this one. So those are good moments as well.
Thank you very much. And I can see as well, we've got our first question in. So I think we'll dive straight into this one. And please, everyone else, do fire your questions over so we can touch on those. So we've got a question here. Can you provide examples about how BCD supports clients in travel recovery in the current uncertain times for the business travel industry?
If I understand it correctly, I'll try it. Now I've got two answers to this. In the recovery is very much providing information and whether they've got bookings identified or not, if they've got travelers that are impacted. So sending that information out, for example, with the Nice attack this morning, we've informed our clients, whether they had bookings in the area or not. In terms of recovery in certain times in the business travel industry, also we have an assessment where we dive into their travel program, identifying gaps, identifying opportunities, and I won't get too much into it, but I kind of touch briefly on it and probably get into it a little bit more. But really diving into various areas of their program for providing recommendations. It could even be where they're performing strong. So. Yeah, I don't know, kind of hitting 2 points there. I don't know if that anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, because I think the question also has another aspect that I was understanding as well about the current situation, about the back to travel somehow. And on that case, also we have also a portal where we provide information to our travelers, so to gain the confidence for them to travel again, to go back to travel again. So that's there's different areas where we have that support, but yeah, we have those tools.
Perfect. And whilst we wait for some more questions as well, I guess just to steer it away from, I suppose, the COVID market space that we have at the moment. I mean, what would you say sort of highlights the key industry takeaways and things that people could really do with having awareness of within the audience here today?
I'll start with that one there. So I think I mentioned it a little briefly earlier, but I'll say it again. So really now is the time for companies to evaluate their program, or even first, do they have a program in place, right? So really don't wait until travel resumes, and preparation is key. So review what you've got in place today, and strengthen where you see gaps. So you can, one way is to look at past incidents that may have had an impact on your company or your organization. Or even, do what if scenarios. What if this were to occur? We know that you can't prepare for every type of scenario at 100%, but even if you've got, managed to get to 90% is still better in building a more solid program and having a solid program in place. So I think the second also is to ensure stakeholders are involved, right? So to drive the program forward, who manages the day-to-day? I mentioned earlier, there can be supporting teams like legal and finance that may not always know that they're part of this, or, they're not called upon often frequently. Also people changing within the organization. So really ensure, that they're aware of their responsibilities, and make sure to keep your program alive with ongoing review and audit as well.
And traveler engagement. Again,
sorry.
The travelers, they need to do their part. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. Because if you do all that without the travelers being engaged and being on board, then there is very little that you're going to achieve. So that's very important.
And I guess as well, I mean, maybe this is just a sort of a personal question, but putting COVID to one side, why should companies care about, or why should people care about travel risk? You'd assume that there's always going to be risk in everything they do. So Lise,
there is, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's with the pandemic, this is on the top of minds, and with many organizations that we're not prepared for it, right? But I mean, other risks won't go away, as travel resumes. So there's still the need to focus on large-scale events like earthquakes, natural disasters, terrorism. I mean, again, going back to the example that occurred in Nice this morning, and also isolated incidents as well. So medical emergencies, car accidents that happen much more frequently, and the leading cause of death for business travelers. So, for example, if you look at COVID and how things have changed, we're seeing that travelers are opting more to drive rather than taking short haul flights to their destination that normally they would fly. But with that being said, right, are there policies in place around limitation of hours on the road on a given day for that traveler? So we're driving driving at certain times of the night or overnight, for example. So, not only to consider, should we consider risks, but also the tracking around it too. I think more companies feel that they've got the tools to track their travelers at any given moment. However, it always just takes, a few slips that, can have an impact. And I know, Jorge, I think you've got some examples of how what I mean by those slips and how travelers can fall off the radar.
We have these stories about this. We have like that crew member from a company that goes to a destination, and then it goes arrives to the airport, and then it still have to go into the jungle, 3 hours bus ride, and no one knows because the last point of tracking was that airport, and there is no tracking beyond that situation. For the driving, you have people that might have been on a flight from Singapore to London with a stop in Singapore, like 23 hours flight, something like that. They arrive into London, and then they still drive back home for 1 hour. So guess what? The danger is not on the planes. The danger is on that person driving back home, because he might be tired after such a long flight. You have people going on a trip, on a business trip, and then staying the weekend by their own, and probably booking an hotel outside the program in another location that probably is a different risk level than the original place of business. So things like that still needs to be considered. Things that needs to be contemplated on the child risk management policy and the program, and what to do on those cases. We have this case, another example. An IT person from a Belgian company was going to have a big meeting because they were closing a deal in Milano, the flight was canceled. The Brussels to Milano flight was canceled because it was a strike in the Brussels airport. And she chose to rent a car and drive to Milano because the business was so important. But that person was 11 hours in the middle of Europe driving, very, very long drive, without no one knowing in the company. So from one side, she was doing something right, but from the other side was putting herself at risk without knowing. And you have also cases where you might go to your plane, you've been upgraded, they're offering you to go on an earlier flight and in business, so no extra cost for the company. But guess what? You are no longer on the whatever airlines flight 1, 2, 3, you are going to be on the 4, 5, 6, and no one knows about it. So these sort of things needs to be all organized somehow in the program and need to be addressed. And so it's not only COVID. There is these things happening in any travel program.
All right. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Brilliant detail as well. And I'm seeing we're getting a few questions through. So thank you everyone in the audience for doing so. So I've got the first question here from Kevin. Please share your thoughts about the establishment of travel safety committees within organizations.
Oh, that's very important. I think that's something that is important to have in the companies, because that way you can involve different departments. You can involve sometimes travelers, more seasoned travelers like road warriors. You might have some groups in the company that might be also affected, and so if they have these committees and they can discuss and they can have feedback and provide information to the rest of the travelers, this is very good. I would say this is a good approach, and that's very good.
And I would just add to that, I mean, more than ever, especially given these times, right? Those are the travelers are the ones that are out on the road, reporting back. How was your trip? Were there pain points? Was there success? And sharing that for improvements, or even highlighting, what the company has in place and what they've been doing, and the success of for that potential trip. So I really, listening to your travelers is, I think, it's very, very important.
And sometimes it might be easier for the traveler population to listen to a travel safety because it's coming from a peer, that if it's coming from a HR department or some, it's more like peer-to-peer sort of recommendation, and that could be a very good thing. As well, we are discussing these days that there is we want the travelers to gain confidence to travel back again, and we provide information and so on. That's very true, but there is also other travelers that they can't wait to get out of home. So probably those people, they are not going to be so passionate, and they are not going to pay attention to the risk that they might be facing. So that needs to be addressed as well. So these committees might be able to help with those questions.
Right.
Committees, or even like a type of chatter group or a vlog, right? I mean, there's different means to achieve that as well.
Brilliant. I think, very well answered. Thank you very much. And we've got another question here, and just getting really pleased that people are sending these through while we've got such brilliant experts on the call. So we've got Sean saying, how can travel by car be captured in terms of risk mitigation? How can someone know if something happens to me in a car between point A and B?
That's a very good question. And that's very true that it's possible that no one might know that something happened to you. There is what we say it on the duty of care definition, reasonable efforts and so on. They're not going to put a GPS. They can. I mean, there's the technology, there's GPS tracking, all that, but still we don't know if that is what we are going to do. We are going to monitor if you didn't move for the last half an hour, something happened. I mean, there is panic buttons, there's these sort of things. But I would say that before that, we need to really address, when are you going to be traveling? Okay, if I'm sent to Montreal for a trip and my company is allowing me to rent a car, that requires me to know that how to drive in winter in Montreal. which I don't know because I'm from Barcelona and we don't see snow so often. If I'm going to London, I live in London, so I know how to drive in the other side. But also, again, it might be people who's traveling, and it's going to be, so the chances that those people will have an accident might be higher. So it's not so much to monitor the actual moment that that person might have an accident, but probably do the right thing preventing that from happening, with the right information, with the right training, and avoiding unnecessary risk if there is not other case, other scenario.
And just even if something happens that is not, I mean, that the traveler is able, there is an accident, but the traveler is able to communicate back to the company, making sure that he knows who to communicate that to. If he's, it's broken leg, for example, needs to go to the hospital and he's missing a business opportunity or a business meeting the next day. Well, did he contact his manager? But then maybe it reaches to HR. So really having that, who to contact within the company, so it's not, hitting other people and getting lost essentially as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to carry on with these chats, questions people are sending through, because we're getting
absolutely
through a few of them in. So I've got another question here from Karen. What about a company's duty of care during private extensions of business trips?
This is,
I think that's your leisure, I'm guessing.
The leisure thing. We see all sorts of cases here. We see companies that they say, no, you cannot extend your trip. That's not allowed in our program. We see companies that they say, you know what, if you will have that benefit, and some people it makes it more attractive to go to a meeting and then be able to stay a couple of days and so on. So all depends how is the policy in the company. But if the company allows it, then they need to make sure they provide assistance to the travelers as well, because it's going to be very difficult to justify in a court that traveler was not there because of you. So you need to make sure that you have rules and you have cases. We have a situation with an employee who was traveling to a meeting in Paris, and then she extended her trip to Russia, went to Russia for the weekend, and then went back, and she was American. So the risk in Paris, which it's high risk destination because terrorist threats and all that, probably is not the same as in Russia. So you need to make sure that there is boundaries. There's, okay, you are allowed to extend, but on the same level of risk and so on. So these things needs to be considered. It's not the same to be in Cairo, which is a high risk destination, and then extending to go doing scuba diving in the beach, which is much higher risk destination. So those things needs to be considered. I don't know, you, Lise, if you have any.
No, I think you've covered, but I was going to say, really, whether you allow it or whether you don't, regardless, there needs to be guidelines established around it, like anything.
Perfect. I think we've got another point come through, but I think that might be a statement rather than a question. So I'm just going to, pull out some of my own questions, and please, everybody else is here as well, do keep firing in your questions. As I say, we've got two of the most brilliant minds within this in space on the call today. So do use their knowledge as much as we can. So I suppose as well, I mean, a lot of this conversation or questions, I think, have been from a corporate perspective, about travel risk and I guess crisis management. But what are your views of taking travelers' perspective of travel risk and how they might see it? And if I start with Lise.
I think that's a great question, and it's really important to highlight here that travelers also play a role and have an impact on their perspective. So I know we kind of mentioned it a little bit more, but they have the responsibility to follow the duty of care procedures their companies have in place and comply with those policies. But however, of course, those policies have to be communicated by the company, right? In order for the traveler to adhere to them. So, are they aware of potential, is the traveler aware of any potential repercussions in not doing so? Such as not being tracked if an incident occurs or he makes a change at the airport. So, the why behind it as well, essentially. I think more than ever, travelers are really looking for guidance and information. So this was not a thing in the past. We mentioned, especially with the road warriors or the confident travelers, I should say. They now want to be kept up to date and, more importantly, informed with situations that are ever changing. Being best prepared for their trip, what to expect, paying attention to country guidelines that are ever changing, airlines, hotels, ground transportation that has changed since the past. So I think, as we mentioned, for everyone on the call, I'm assuming that if not the majority, all of you are travelers. Really share your feedback with your colleagues in your company. Because really now, travelers are also, for organization, travelers are also listening and also, helping that to get that confidence back on the road again.
All right. And I'm going to dive into this other question, actually, and this is something that comes up in my household regularly when we're talking about work trips. So Karen has said, thank you for answering an earlier question, but what about the duty of care for the accompanying partner on a business trip? Or of a business traveler, they say.
That's again, it depends on the rules of the company. If it's not an employee from the corporation, there is no duty. There is no legal obligation for the company to protect that partner, unless has been invited to an event, and then there are certain rules that they need to follow. Normally, they have insurance. They have things to cover those guests, so they are considered guests. Again, this is something that is very important, that each company checks which type of coverage, which type of insurance they have. Because if they organizing these events, they are sending you with your wife and so on, but there is no clear understanding where is the legal obligation for the company is about you. Your partner is not, unless it's covered by an extra insurance. And these things needs to be covered. And need to be addressed. And somehow watch out, because those insurance as well might say, we know insurance, how tricky they are. You might say, oh, well, but we don't cover if you serve alcohol at the event, which very common is that you might have parties, you might have dinner. So you need to make sure which type of insurance you have for each event, for each case, to make sure that everything is covered. So something to audit and check.
All right. And I've seen we're getting a few more questions as well on this. I'm gonna raise this one. I'm trying to keep us away from COVID as much as we can, but I think we've stayed away from it, so we can maybe answer this one question on it. So this thing, Lisa says, "Hi, great webinar. What's the liability of the organisation if one of the travellers gets COVID whilst on the road?"
Oh, go ahead, Jorge.
No, you go.
Right. I mean, well, first of all, what processes have been established prior to the trip, right? And, again, it goes back to the insurance that they may have. So the liability is that company has sent that traveler to a destination, essentially, and where he got sick or ill on the road, right? But these are processes and that need to be really determined and established before this travel even comes, right? Or this trip happens. Like, these are the processes that should be in place already that companies are thinking before an incident like that or a situation like that actually occurs. To have those answers prior to sending your travelers out on the road.
Right.
And in terms of liability, I mean, the company needs to be able to prove that they did all reasonable efforts. And we know that, and there was a discussion in the US about this as well, about how can you prove that you contracted that during the business trip, that you didn't have it before. You will require that to have tests before you travel in order to prove that you were not, you were negative before going into. So there will be so many kind of legally and things in order to prove that. So this is something that the company, as far as the company say, has everything documented, that provided the right information to the traveler, informing the traveler that they need to use the right protection, mask, and so on. I mean, it's going to be something that is going to be difficult to prove that it was company's fault somehow, because they did all the reasonable efforts to keep that traveler safe. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got one more question left from the audience at the moment. So Bastian, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name correctly. So how have you arranged for the costs associated with an event happening? For instance, if you need to urgently evacuate people, how does that work with regards to costs? And is that from the company? That's the question.
That's something that all depends if you have the right provider next to you or not. That's something that the companies, they need to have providers that will help them to repatriate travelers if they are sick, to repatriate in case of a security incident. This is something that we as a TMC, we have this department, but we always say we are not a security company, not a medical company. We partner with good companies that provide those services, but this is something that you need to make sure that you have those companies, you have that support if you are sending travelers out. And make sure if you have some companies, they say, I have an insurance, they cover everything in case of a medical. Well, check it out, test it, ask them, is this, we saw also as well some exclusions that suddenly insurance they were saying, oh, we don't cover if there is a pandemic. And so people needs to go and do some amendments to those insurance in order to make sure that they were coverage during the pandemic, because no one thought that a pandemic will happen, right? So that sort of things needs to be addressed, but again, before something happens, because if not, the amount of money that you will need to pay, it's huge. It's I mean, any repatriation costs like $20,000 or hospitalization, things like that. I mean, that's a lot of money there. So you need to make sure you have those things.
Perfect. That's very good. And we've got another question in, but I'm just going to dive in with a question as well, actually, because I think we can kind of open this up to a little bit broader. So, we've got on the call, we've got HR, we've got I think heads of security, I'd say, certainly a lot of people within the travel market as well listening in, and really kind of what would you suggest that they can be taking away? And actions can they be putting in their companies? And going to put the question over to Lise.
Yep, I'll take this one, sure. I think, well, what we've gathered assessing programs for companies is really that these people don't come together. Working towards their program and their enhancements, identifying potential gaps, as I mentioned earlier. So, for example, HR, travel, and security, as well as supporting teams, they may not necessarily speak to each other, or they're working in a siloed approach, right? So they've got, one department may have one idea, while another is, thinks that it's functioning in a different way. So it's really important that these departments come together and that their roles are aligned. So who's going to lead what in the event of a crisis or an incident, and what actions are steps to be taken at any given time. So this can vary really between one company and another, different type of business that they do, and that's okay. I mean, some companies may not have a security department, but the most important piece of it is really having those roles established. Essentially, that those roles are established of who's going to do what and when. So this can also include sponsorship. Well, it should also include sponsorship at the C-level, I want to say, because if you don't have that sponsorship at the C-level or the executive level, it's really going to be hard to convince your travelers as well for what you're putting in place. So, and as we mentioned, engage your travelers in your program. As we mentioned with the committee, or hear what they have to say with their pain points and even success that they can share.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'm going to take so we've got another question here from Julian. So we work for a very small firm, but we do travel quite a bit. So I imagine we're just as liable as any other firm. Is there a way to fulfill our duty of care without making a major HR or consulting investment? And are there any tools to make some processes automatic?
You go, Lise? Do you want to
go?
Well,
I mean, yeah, sure, yeah. I think, regardless of the organization, the responsibility towards the responsibility is there. It's not, duty of care, whether it's a large organization or a small organization. It's a fact. It's an obligation. There are tools. There's different tools that can be used, but like I say, maybe the go-to person is a receptionist, right? But and it's establishing a process in place to say, and that's kind of going back to where I mentioned those what if scenarios, starting even with small steps. Where can you direct travelers to get information? Are you booking through a TMC? Are you not booking through a TMC? How are you even tracking your travelers? So these are some of the points that you need to consider. And I think it's always good to start with, like I said, those what if scenarios, and then, going down and starting from there to see, well, did we do that? Did we not do that? What can we do better and improve the next time?
All right.
And it's not necessary to have a fully dedicated travel security team in a company. So small companies, they can also fulfill their duty of care. They will need to use tools that they are already provided by the TMC or by the third party and so on. But also they can customize the cost as well and so on. So it's not like it's impossible to do it. We see companies that they are doing a pretty good job on that sense. So it's up to everyone, really.
All right. And yes, please keep sending questions in, and I'm going to fire one over to you, actually. How do you see, taking a kind of a future vision, how do you see things changing over the next 10 years and evolving within this space?
Travel risk management in 10 years. Technology. In 10 years, technology will do amazing things, and probably with this earlier question will solve a lot of things, because it will have machine learning that will maybe predict threats and will help to avoid things before it happens. We will see blockchain helping to provide travel data and vaccination data and so on in a more secure way, in an international sort of standard that everyone will accept. You might use bots and chatbots to kind of like customize the experience of the traveler. When the traveler has a pre-trip information to go to a destination, asking a chat, will be able to get some answers. Although don't forget that very often it will require human to be also interacting with that traveler, because I don't think everything can be, at least my take on that. Virtual reality, augmented reality, that's something that people might be able to do trainings and put themselves on the situation, what if, and so on in a more easy way. So technology will play a role, and a very, very big role in everything. Of course, duty of care and travel risk management will stay. I see they will be more mature. So this is something that it will be more present. So people might be asking an employer before accepting a job, okay, do you have a travel risk management program on your company? So I'm not going to go work for you and travel with you if you don't take care of that. I'm protected while I'm there. So those things, I think that I'm old enough to remember when the car didn't have a seatbelt on the back seat. And these days you wouldn't buy a car if it doesn't have a seatbelt there. So I think in 10 years' time, it will be travel risk management will be the same. It will be so natural that everyone will have more. It will be more adopted and more mature. That's my take on that for 10 years.
Still can't believe it. You look so young. I've just got there's another question here from Isabella, but I'm not quite sure there's a slight delay, I think, on the questions coming in, so I'm not sure where that's lining up to. But what do you mean by sponsorship in this context? And I think that we can come back to that, I think, if good. We've got a question from Lawrence. If you use is the use of tracking technology for employees a valuable tool in travel risk management?
Sorry, the question is
the use of tracking technology for employees a valuable tool in travel risk management? If so, how is this best used? I think, from our side, I think Safeture is your perfect tool for looking at that. So please, afterwards, do reach out to us, Lawrence, and we'll be more than happy.
You can answer that question as well. There. One thing about tracking, important thing is that very often people believe that tracking tools it's useful to know if the traveler is in that destination or not, and so on. And it's true, that's what you need to know, right? But it's important that you can communicate with that traveler. So if the tool doesn't allow to have a two-way communication with the traveler, then it's pointless, because what you want to know is like, hey, you are in Paris, there is a terrorist attack, do this, and this. Are you okay? And that the tool needs to provide that functionality. Otherwise, yes, if you have one traveler, you can call them, but if you have 100, then it's going to be much more difficult to reach out to everyone at the same time. I don't know if you have any.
I'm fully on board with that. It's very much as Safeture as we stand and try to deliver in the market. But I'm really conscious of not making this about ourselves. Yeah. So, Kevin, I've got a very good question from you here. So, in many organisations, addressing duty of care falls short in the area of meetings and events. So, please share your thoughts.
Jorge, I'll let
you go, Lise.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it very well does, but it still is very important to address it in meeting and events. And sometimes the bookings are done through different channels. The bookings are done, not through the TMC, or they're booking directly through the meeting, and this information is getting lost. So that goes back to having established processes for your employees, even specific to meeting and events, right? So having a way of whether they're enabled to, obviously, to be able to track them. And I know, Jorge, you've got a little bit more to add on this as well, but it still goes back to those having established processes in place. And then of course there's the whole other, when we talk about meetings and events as well, are going back to, you mentioned, for example, coverage on insurance, and what activities that they're doing as well from the insurance perspective is really understanding what coverage, what exclusions there may be for those types of events as well. So Jorge, I know you've got a bit to add on it too.
I would dare to say that the same that you need to have at a risk management program for your travel program, you need to have a plan for your event. And each event is going to be different and need to have different plans, from the tracking, from the bookings, from so many areas, because very often you have that people is invited to attend a convention, but they are going by their own means, or just sending the invoice about the trip. And so you have so many bookings that they are dispersed. Sometimes you have even the local reception company that is booking some other trips around the country, incentive trips that they might have, internal flights and so on. So all that needs to be addressed, needs to be in a central repository. That data needs to be combined in order to activate, because if something happens, you are lost. You don't know where those people are. So that's very important.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I think just looking through, so we've got 6 minutes until we be finishing here. So, I mean, I could sit here and ask questions all day long, but if anybody else has got any, please do fire them in. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and thank you for being here. So, just seeing if we've got any more. I think we're up to date on the questions on the audience. If you've got any more, please do bring them in. And I suppose looking at, if we're going to look at travel policies and companies, so we've got a few people over here in the audience. I mean, what actually, bear with me. So I've got another question in here. I'm going to go to an audience question. Actually, it's going to be better than my questions. So what technologies can help organizations with their program to support their return to travel? I think we've maybe touched on parts of this, but can answer it again, Lise.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we touched a little bit on it, but I think there's really several options to support it here. One, for example, we're finding renewed focus on pre-trip approvals, right? So that was really, largely used in the past for cost control measures, but really now is expanded to evaluate additional risks posed by COVID-19. So the approver also may have now additional matters to consider. For example, that may not have been a thing in the past, right? So if they're looking at, for example, a line manager that was doing an approval for cost measures, now there's, it might be going to a security team or a security department. That's changed in the way that, is that approver able to actually approve that trip for the purpose of it? Also going back to tracking, right? So which was always also a consideration in the past, is getting renewed attention to locate employees and contact tracing. So We talked quite a bit about tracking. There's different means, but also the ways to communicate it, two-way communication, and even GPS tracking for certain employees. And I think another aspect is going back to the communication piece, like we mentioned, right? So, targeting messaging, going back to policies, we're speaking about a travel risk management policy, but no traveler is going to read a 40-page document. Well, if they do, well, they've got lots of time in their hand. But I mean, going back to targeted messaging is really, sending out timely messages on the app when travelers need it the most. So for example, a day before my travel, do you have this, and this, and this, so you're prepared. So really using targeting messaging, whether it be on the online booking tool, an app, so those types of messaging as well. To really connect with your travelers. And I would almost flip this one back at you, James, with your technology as well. As I know, Safeture, you're well advanced in the field to help clients with the technology and messaging to support as well. So,
yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk all day now. Certainly not the forum to do today. So, yeah, thank you. And I think probably last question. We'll see if maybe I'll get another chance for another one as well, if anyone wants to put in. So how should companies better gather and utilize traveler feedback after their trip? To Jorge.
Well, now more than ever, the feedback is very important to be collected, because you need to know that those travelers that they are going to be traveling, you put some rules in place, some precautions. So are those hotels that you choose following the safety and policies and cleaning and all that they are claiming? So you need to collect that. So in order to really see if what you are doing is going well. So that feedback needs to be collected. It could be with a short survey, it could be with a quick call, depending on how big is the organization, but you need to make sure that you are collecting information, quality information about how that trip went. And those travel committees, as well as safety committees from some companies, might be a good entry point as well to collect that feedback. Another thing as well is you need to have a way to check as well how is the stress levels of your travelers these days. We know that road warriors, normally they have a lot of, because they are flying so many hours and so on. Now that the stress level is going to be everywhere, because people is concerned, people get a text like, oh, you've been in touch with, you've been close to someone who has COVID, you might need to have a text, and that person is already in panic mode because we are scared, right? So you need to have a way that you are following that as well in your organization. And let me jump on something here. When we were talking about having medical support, that medical support now also needs to include mental support. That before, you wouldn't consider that before COVID, but now it's something that you need to use as well. And then also about that feedback, and just to close here, you need to remember you might have different age groups in your company. You might have a 25-year-old, and maybe you need to communicate with them in a different way that you communicate with a more senior person. So you need to also be aware when communicating with your population, with your travel population, that someone might read an email, someone might read a text, and someone might read on the social page of the company. So these things needs to be addressed and customized somehow. And that's all.
Perfect. And thank you very much. And Lise, I'm sure we could sort of carry on talking all day with the contest. We've come to the hour, and I thank you ever so much for your time today and the brilliant insights and information you've given. And I think for everybody here as well, please do continue with your questions either to BCD or ourselves outside this conversation. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been really enjoyed the time, and hopefully you have as well. So thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe. Bye.
Safeture, the world's leading employee safety platform.